I was on a road trip from northern Washington to southern Utah to meet up with my family for just a few days around Christmas. For the road trip, I rented an Airbnb along the way. Wasn't looking for anything great. Really just needed a place to sleep. So, I found the cheapest place right in the halfway point in Idaho. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere, not near any towns or cities, but it was only a mile off the highway, so it was perfectly convenient for what I needed it for. I left in the morning and started getting close as the sun was going down. The section of Idaho I was in was covered in forest and seemed pretty uninhabited. Not a lot of houses or other places around except for, I guess, the Airbnb. After a while of going down the highway, my phone told me to turn off on a very small dirt road. There were no lights or other indications that a path was even there. I drove slowly and carefully for the entire mile down this dirt road until I made it to the cabin. And on first glance, it looked way bigger than I expected. There were no images of the outside on the listing, but it said it was only a single bedroom cabin, so I expected something fairly small. I parked right outside the front. The whole forest around the cabin was dense and dark. I could hear all the birds and animals calling out as the night was coming in. I headed up to the door and legitimately almost had a heart attack when the door suddenly opened. "Didn't mean to scare you," the man said in an overly friendly voice and with a wide smile. I was still recovering from the scare and confused who this guy was and why he was even here. He explained he was Charlie, the owner of the Airbnb. I think he could still tell I didn't understand. And that's when he said, "Your room is right over here." And I realized what this was. The Airbnb was a room in the cabin, not the whole cabin itself. I couldn't believe I'd made a mistake like that. I was sure it didn't say it was a shared living space. But at the time, and under pressure, I figured with the pictures not having shown the outside and it saying it was one room, it all made sense. I followed Charlie in. He led me down the long hallway all the way to the farthest room on the end of the cabin. The hallway was noticeably dark. Didn't have a single ceiling light or lamp or anything. Charlie gave me a key to the cabin and to my room, then gave another big smile and said, "Enjoy," leaving me to settle in. I closed the door and tossed my bag on the bed. I really wasn't comfortable with being out in some isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere with a stranger, but it was an Airbnb. Surely, it was fine. And the only reason I decided to follow through with it and stay is because I was just there for a single night. I was going to chill in the room, get some sleep, and head out first thing in the morning. I tried to not overthink it. I unzipped my bag and started unpacking just the few things I needed for the night. A couple minutes in, Charlie knocked on the room door. It made me jump again because I never heard his footsteps coming down the hall. It was like he had just been standing there. I walked over and cracked it open. His wide, empty smile was beginning to come off as really creepy, and the overly friendly voice he was faking made it even worse. He asked how I liked the room. I just said it was great, trying to be kind and keep the conversation quick. He nodded and told me to holler if I needed anything else. I said thank you and closed the door, but this time I waited for a second. The guy didn't move for an eerily long amount of time before I finally heard his footsteps depart and walk down the hall. I locked the door. Something about that guy really made me uncomfortable. I knew he could have just been trying really hard to be nice and a good host, but it came off as fake and almost uncanny. I stayed in the bedroom for 30 minutes, staying on my phone and just listening to the cabin to make sure Charlie wasn't doing anything weird. I could hear the muffled sound of the TV in the living room start playing after a while. And so eventually, I felt good enough to start getting ready for bed. I set my phone on the nightstand to charge, brushed my teeth, then got in the shower. It was one of those old tub showers that looked honestly disgusting. The shower curtain looked fairly new, though, and was one of those blurry, kind of see-through ones. I turned the water on and tried to be quick, but only a minute or so after getting the water running, I heard a slight thump from outside the bedroom, like somewhere in the hallway. I moved my body out of the water and tried to listen. I didn't hear anything else, but for a split second, I thought I saw something, like possibly a shadow move in the bedroom. I saw it through the blurry curtain and immediately opened it and looked out, but didn't see anything. I stood there looking and waiting for a minute, then quickly finished washing off and got out and got dressed. When I walked back into the room, I naturally looked toward the door where I heard the sound from and felt the blood rush from my face as I saw the bedroom door was cracked open. Not fully wide open, but obviously it didn't matter because I knew I had locked it. I stood there frozen for a second, then rushed over, slamming it closed and locking it again. Something was seriously wrong with this cabin. And I no longer felt safe at all. Not with Charlie opening locked doors like that. Even just thinking about that stranger walking in with his creepy smile while I was showering gave me chills. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and while I tried to figure out what to do, I opened the Airbnb app and looked at the listing. I was trying to see if others had reported strange behavior in their reviews. There were only 3 other reviews, giving 5 stars, but honestly rereading them now, they looked completely fake. And even more unsettling, I realized I hadn't made a mistake at all. The listing said it was a standalone cabin, not some room in a shared residence. Nothing was adding up. Or I guess everything was adding up, but in the most unsettling way. I needed to leave immediately. I packed the few things I had into my bag, then went up to the door and put my ear against it, listening to try and hear where Charlie was and if I could make a quick exit without drawing attention. I heard the muffled TV still playing from the living room, which I knew was right next to the front door. But as I stood there quietly, I started to hear something else. Something soft coming from inside the room I was in. I slowly turned around. I heard this low, raspy breathing from right where the bedroom closet was. I threw the bedroom door open and sprinted out of there. The living room was empty as I ran past it and right out to my car. I drove dangerously fast down the rugged dirt road until I made it to the highway. And after calling my mom in a panic, she convinced me to make a report with the police. I did, but I'll save you all the unimportant details because let's just say nothing came from it. His disturbing, creepy behavior wasn't provable. And the only thing he actually got in trouble for was listing the cabin incorrectly on Airbnb. And just to add to the creepiness, Charlie wasn't even his name. Thankfully, the listing was removed for false advertising, and I never saw it get relisted, so hopefully no one else has to go through that like I did. Can't even imagine what would have happened if I didn't leave the cabin that night. This was a couple of years ago. I was 23. I rented this cabin because I wanted a stress-free vacation. It was early winter, I think 2 weeks after Christmas, which I guess is off-season for these kinds of cabins. So, I got a really good deal on it. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how completely silent it was. If you haven't been to an isolated cabin or spot in the woods in a while, the lack of any sounds is really strange at first. Calm, but also a bit unnerving, acting as a reminder to know just how alone you are out there. Anyway, the cabin itself was exactly like the pictures. Simple and a little old, but overall cozy. I unpacked slowly, made a quick dinner, and spent the night reading by the fireplace. Nothing happened that night. I just went to sleep and woke up feeling great. In the morning, I made breakfast and coffee and stayed in for the whole morning and a bit of the afternoon before getting a little bored. I noticed when I got there that the owner had a rough map hung up next to the front door of a trail behind the cabin. So, I decided this was a good time to check it out. Looked like it was just a couple of miles and from the owner's description was just a simple walking path. I got my jacket and headed out. It was pretty clear right away that this wasn't some nice, well-maintained trail. I think the owner might have made it a few years ago and never touched it again. It was mostly overgrown and very hard to keep track of. And oddly on the map in the cabin, it only showed a single trail, basically just a loop through the woods. But halfway down, I came across another path splitting from it. I didn't see anything down that way in the distance, but curiosity got the better of me and I decided to check it. I had nothing better to do anyway. For the first 5-ish minutes, I didn't see anything. Had no idea what the trail could have possibly been there for or how it was even made. But then I came across a section of the path covered in thick brush. And after pushing my way through it, I found what was at the end. There was another cabin. It was old and rotting, moss on the sides, and dilapidated to the point it was clear that it hadn't been taken care of in decades. It was just about the creepiest looking cabin I'd ever seen. And it being out in the middle of the woods, not all that far away from the one I was staying at, only made it more disturbing. I walked up closer to it and peered into the doorway, which was missing the actual door. It looked the same on the inside as it did on the outside, completely in ruins and even smelling like rot and mildew. Dust covered every inch of the place. But the one odd thing I saw that stood out the most was a line of footprints on the floor, like scuffs on the wood and in the dust that hadn't faded yet, like someone had been there somewhat recently. My immediate thought was that maybe some person that rented the cabin before had also found this place. But as I was thinking about it, something shifted in the side of my view. When I looked, I saw a black open doorway. Black as in whatever that room was, it didn't have any windows or lights at all. It looked like a void of darkness past the doorway. Even though it was in the corner of my eye, I was absolutely sure I saw something move right there. I sort of panicked and just ran back to the trail, moving quickly until I made it back to the rental cabin. I couldn't help but have this feeling almost indescribable that something really bad had happened in that cabin or was happening. I don't know. The gut feeling was strong though, and there was no way I was going back there. I locked myself in the cabin and tried to relax. I told myself that likely nothing would come from it. I texted the owner of the rental about the old cabin I found out there, hoping he would confirm it was just an abandoned place on his land and nothing to worry about. An hour later, he texted me back, and I thought his response was strange. He responded with just a single sentence saying there were no other cabins nearby in the woods. I didn't know how to respond to that because I just told him that I found a cabin back there. What did he mean? There weren't any other cabins. It was like he didn't believe me or didn't want me to know anything about the cabin I found, almost gaslighting me. I didn't end up saying anything else to him. Over the rest of the afternoon and later into the night, I was able to settle back down and almost forget about that other cabin. Think I eventually was able to convince myself it was just an abandoned, vacant, and forgotten place. No more, no less. I made dinner, had a few drinks, and sat by the fireplace. It was probably around 11 or so because I know I was staying up pretty late. And really, just out of nowhere, that feeling came back. My stomach tightened and that aching, awful gut feeling grew inside me again. It was very sudden. I sat up from the couch and started looking around, but everything was dark and quiet. So, I got up and looked out the window, thinking maybe I unconsciously heard something. The woods were dead quiet. No movement, no sounds. Even the trees were perfectly still and motionless. How calm it looked out there was unsettling. I felt paranoid, which isn't a feeling I was used to. Honestly, that might have been the first and only time in my life I'd ever felt that way. I stared out the window, looking at the dark entrance to the rugged trail behind the cabin. And then after 5 minutes of waiting, I heard something. A few leaves crunch or sticks snapping right outside of the cabin. Someone was out there walking around. I followed the sounds, moving toward the front door. I faintly heard the thumps of the person step onto the porch and go right up to the door. And then it went quiet. After 30 seconds, I quickly pulled my phone out and for some reason, instead of calling the police, I texted the owner telling him someone was outside the cabin right now and asking if he knew who it was or if someone was supposed to be here. I don't know why I didn't just play it safe and call the police first. I think it just felt weird to call the police to someone else's cabin. But eerily, as soon as I sent the text, I heard a phone chime right outside the front door of the cabin. My gut feeling instantly got even worse. It was the owner outside, but why the hell was he here? And why didn't he text me first? Why was he just standing out there? Something wasn't right about any of this. And I knew in the back of my head that this all somehow connected back to the abandoned cabin out there. Even after I heard his phone chime, he didn't text me back. I dialed 911. There were a couple minutes after I got off the phone with the police that I just stood still, waiting in the eerie silence, knowing he was still right outside that door. My biggest fear was knowing that he had to have had a key to the cabin and could just walk in if he wanted to. But for some reason, he didn't. It felt like he was out there debating whether or not to do something. Eventually, I heard a few thumps on the porch and then it remained quiet until police arrived. I told them everything and also showed them the messages on my phone. They immediately went to the owner's main address to talk to him and he wasn't there. Didn't answer the door and didn't answer his phone, which if it was him outside the cabin, this all made sense because there was no way he could have gotten far just walking through the woods. Over the next few days, when they finally got him to talk, he still denied everything. Said he wasn't even at the cabin and didn't know anything I was talking about. The officers agreed this was all super fishy and seemed like he was up to something. Or maybe that cabin I found had something he was hiding. But without a search warrant and without any real evidence of anything, the cops really couldn't do anything else. So, I'm not sure what was going on there. Maybe it was partially my fault for having explored further than I should have, but I think things could have been a lot worse if I had tried to dig a little deeper into what was in that cabin. I lived in what you'd call your typical cabin in the woods. It was a half hour from town, give or take, and mainly just a comfortable, quiet place. It was so far out of the way that in the 8 years I'd lived there before this, I had never seen or even heard anyone near my cabin. This day, I had basically nothing to do. And at some point in the morning, I went for a walk around my land. I knew it well enough to not need a trail or anything. So, I was just hiking through the trees and enjoying the forest when I stumbled on something that immediately was very odd. I was just 300 or 400 feet from the back of my cabin and found the remnants of a campsite, a burnt-out pile of ashes from a campfire, and a flat area that looked like a tent had been set up on. From standing there in the middle of the campsite, I could see my cabin between all the trees. That's how close it was. So, whoever this was, they couldn't possibly have thought they weren't on anyone's property. Sort of felt like they meant to be. I did some more walking, looking around for any more signs of someone being around there, but came up empty-handed. It was just that one spot. I don't know how I never noticed them. I think I just never thought to even look around the cabin, having spent so many years being alone out there. But the rest of the day, I didn't see anything. And even at night, I checked the windows and didn't see any clear signs of a campfire or anyone being around. The next few days were all normal. It was a Saturday night that I decided to drink for a bit on my back porch and enjoy the calm forest. When I saw an orange glow flickering in the trees. It was from the same spot as where I'd seen the campsite at, and from the light, I was 100% sure it was a campfire. I got up and probably against my better judgment, started walking over there to confront them, or at least tell whoever was there that this was my property. I was going to try to be nice about it, too. Maybe even let them finish camping the night just to not cause any inconvenience and keep the whole interaction friendly. I really should have gotten a flashlight first, though, because as I walked up, I could barely see anything aside from the warm glow of the campfire. And when I got to the campsite, it was empty. No one was there. Just a fire burning in the middle of the trees and a tent right next to it. Someone had to have been here just minutes ago, which made me think this person probably was watching me and saw me walking over, leaving the campsite and hiding before I got there. I started looking around a little more frantically, but everything between the trees was full of shadows. If someone was out there, I couldn't see them at all. After a minute, it got way too tense and uneasy being out there. And I started to hurry back to my cabin. I wanted to get my phone and call the police. Even if the guy ran off, I figured maybe they could investigate a little and figure out who this guy was and why he was out here. But I stopped right in the middle of the field between the woods in my cabin. My front door was wide open. The realization hit me that whoever was out here had entered my cabin while I was at the campsite. Knowing I'd been lured out or tricked and had nowhere to really go, I was horrified. I couldn't call the cops or hide in my cabin or run to get help. I just stood there in the middle of the field stuck and unsure what the hell to do. I mean, there was nowhere to run. I needed either my phone or my car keys. I slowly crept closer to the cabin and I noticed that all the lights in the cabin were turned off now, too. It was completely dark in there. I got right up to the front door and peered in, but didn't see any movement. "Who's in there?" I waited several seconds for any sounds, but heard nothing. So, I took a couple steps in. My own heart beating felt like it was so loud, and every sense in my body was spiked up from the adrenaline. My car keys were closer than my phone was, right on the end table near the kitchen. I'm pretty sure I left my phone on the other side of the cabin in the bedroom, so I decided to just go for my car keys. After building up the courage, I quickly moved over to grab them. As I got up to the table, I saw something in the kitchen. A figure hidden in the dark, shadowy corner of the kitchen watching me. I bolted back toward the front door, hearing his heavy footsteps running up behind me. I slammed the door to buy me some time and hurried into my car. The man didn't let up at all, still sprinting at me as I turned the car on and started backing out. I had to do a 3-point turn and he caught up just enough to grab one of the door handles and open it slightly before I pulled away. I made it out just milliseconds before he could get in. I drove all the way to the police station in town. The whole drive, all I could think about was how close that encounter was and that man was still at my cabin. He could be doing anything and there was nothing I could do to stop him. And obviously that anxiety was with me during the whole time I waited at the police station for word back on the officers they sent to investigate. And I almost couldn't believe it when one of the officers reported back that the person had attempted to burn down my cabin. They found the fireplace raging, loaded with a mountain of wood that flooded into the whole living room. It's a miracle the floors or ceiling didn't catch, and the officers that were there were able to tame it enough to keep it at bay until the fire department could smother it. The only evidence left behind of the man was the ashes in his campsite. Everything else, including himself, was gone without trace. The whole thing was elevated to such a horrifying level, knowing he was trying to harm me and had probably been stalking me for days or weeks, watching my cabin from the woods. And I didn't have any idea who he was or why he was doing any of it. I didn't stay at my cabin for a single night after that, having movers pack and move everything to a new place far away from there. The crime investigation went on for months after that, but without new leads, it didn't ever come to much, and ultimately things fizzled out. I don't think I'll ever know what was planned for me or how bad things really could have gotten out at that cabin.